Hey everybody, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and I'm finally back with another video. I've been working on this since the Maxwell 2 ANC video dropped, and I want to talk about pads for the Maxwell 2 today. I plan on releasing and producing more videos. I promise you that. I've been trying really hard. This has been a very tough year, and this is like my 5th take on explaining this. So I'm just going to kind of keep it close hold for now. Maybe I'll eventually share stuff, but there's been just a lot of things kind of thrown at me and my family this year, and it's made it difficult to focus on content because I put health and family first. So I didn't want to rush this. There's a lot of testing involved with this, and I have a new website, headphonedatabase.com, if you're not familiar with that. Link in the description below for that. That is a site that will include clamp force measurements, pad dimensions, advanced specs, or at least at a high level table view. And then if you click on the measurement page, that takes you to a much more advanced measurement site that I've been building effectively since last October. So that will continue to evolve. And of course, I measured all of these new pads on the Maxwell 2 ANC edition and the standard Maxwell 2. So if you have either one, I am pleased to say that all the aftermarket pads that work with the Maxwell 2 will work on the Maxwell 2 ANC. So today's video is all about comparing the stock pads for both models to the aftermarket pads from Wicked Cushions and Dekoni. Now I have links in the description below for all of these, as well as special discounts as well where applicable. So we don't do discounts on the stealth pads. This is the one that I collab with Wicked Cushions, and I just wanted the lowest possible price I could retail it for. So I baked in the discount basically. The Wicked Cushion FreZe Pad retails from $30.99 US all the way up to $33.99 depending on the finish, because you can customize these to give you different color choices if you want to add something different to customize your Maxwell. The Dekoni pads are a little bit more expensive. The Midnight uses an artificial leather just like the stock pads. This is $35 US, and I do have a link in the description or a coupon code that will save you money on everything from Dekoni, not just these pads. So if you're a big Dekoni fan, use that coupon code and save some money. I also have the sheepskin pad. Now this pad is $80. It's a significant price increase over the others, but that's because it uses real leather. Real leather naturally costs more. It's not going to be for everyone, but it does have its own unique pros that I'll be discussing later in this video. Let's start with the basics and show you just how easy it is to swap a pad out with the Maxwell. If you're not familiar with this, the Maxwell 2 uses a magnetic pad. It's different than the older Maxwell 1, so those pads will not work with the 2 and vice versa. It's so simple. I mean, any of these will obviously work, and you just snap it in like that, and it's a pretty strong magnet. On that note, and that's the left pad, if I put the FreZe Pad on, I think maybe there's a slightly stronger magnet on the Dekoni pad over the Wicked Cushions, but it's really minimal, and I don't feel like there's any lack of security. I can still pick up this headset with the pad attached. Dekoni took a different approach as far as pad dimensions go. The stock Maxwell 2 pads, the non-ANC version, are the thinnest, most open pad. They have the least amount of pad material there. However, there's still enough clearance where most ears fit in the ear chamber, if you will, inside the pad, no problem. The stealth pad and the FreZe Pad are modeled very similarly to each other in terms of dimensions go. They have a similar opening, front depth, and rear depth, whereas the Dekoni takes a completely different approach, going with a round design. The round design is a 60mm opening top and bottom, and they have a 31mm depth. So the aftermarket pads from Wicked Cushions are basically angled. So you get a shallower depth up front and a deeper one in the back. And if you've used my website and you're wondering why there's 4 sets of dimensions, it's because it goes by height, width, front depth, and rear depth. Naturally, with a thicker pad, it is going to change comfort and it's going to change clamp force. So the Dekoni pads, being as thick as they are, they have the highest clamp force, and it's noticeable. The thinner pads from Audeze will have the least amount of clamp force, and then the stealth pads and FreZe pads are kind of in the middle. So it's comparable to the Maxwell 2 ANC. That's more or less within the margin of error in terms of clamp force goes. And the Maxwell 2 ANC model typically has slightly more clamp force in general because the headband, at least on my unit, is slightly more stiff than this. It's actually quite important because you have to have a good seal to have consistent ANC performance. There is one other impact of having a thicker pad, and that does impact sizing. So this fits me like perfectly. Honestly, the stock ANC pads from Audeze are so good from a comfort and fitment perspective. I'm really happy with them. And when you switch to the Maxwell 2 Dekoni pads, whether it's the Midnight one, which is what I'm going to grab now, let's put that on. So on the Midnight pad, and the sheepskin pad, because it's so much thicker up front, you could see a difference in how it looks on my head. It's quite drastic, but it pushes the headphone up, like the headset sits higher, and as a result, I have some pressure on my earlobes. So if you have a larger head and you're already pushing the sizing constraints of the Maxwell 2 because you're on the largest headband adjustment, the Dekoni pads might make that a bigger issue. If sizing has not been an issue, or if you find the headset too loose on your head, conversely, the Dekoni pads will fit the most snug. So in terms of overall clamp force, Dekoni leads. They also have the highest stability. I would say the Dekoni pads are the most stable on my head. And then it's comparably similar to the Stealth pad just because there's a little bit more surface friction here, and the stock Maxwell 2 ANC pad. Then it goes to the FreZe Pad being less stable because it's a more slippery surface and it's not like a crazy thick pad. And then the stock Maxwell 2 non-ANC pad is the least stable on my head. So in that order, if you move your head up and down and around and all that, the least stable ones, the headset's going to move and possibly even fall off your head. Whereas ones like the Dekoni, the Stealth, or even the ANC one really helps keep it more snug. So another reason why you might consider pad swapping is the temperature comfort, because the stock Maxwell pads are designed for isolation and they use artificial leather because of cost reasons, because if they ship them with real leather, this headset would be significantly more expensive. So stock pads, again, they're very compliant. They are comfortable to wear, but a leatherette material does trap in more heat and moisture. So if that is a concern with you, any of these other pads, with exception of the Midnight pad, which I am actually having on the Maxwell 2 right now, the Midnight pad is also a leatherette. So as far as temperature goes, the Midnight pad and both stock Maxwell pads feel the warmest on my head. This is a larger opening, so sure, the depth might help internally for some of the warmth built up inside. But as far as the surface material goes, along with the slightly higher clamp force, I don't like wearing the Midnights for too long of a period of time. To me, they're probably the least enjoyable for endurance gaming, just because the stock Maxwell pads are lighter in clamp force. So to me, that actually kind of counters it a little bit. The next coolest pad is actually the sheepskin, because real leather has some unique breathing properties to it, and it has really good sound isolation and comparable ANC performance. And I can show you those measurements shortly. But the real leather pads are just an awesome pad for balancing both. If you want the active noise cancellation functionality of the Maxwell 2 and you want aftermarket pads, I'm going to be blunt and say that the sheepskin pads, even though they're the most expensive, they balance noise isolation and long-term comfort, breathability, and heat buildup the best. Because when you go with more breathable pads like the FreZe and the Stealth, part of why they're cooler and more comfortable to wear is because they're more breathable, which is counterintuitive to active noise cancellation. If you don't need ANC, you can still get the standard Maxwell 2, of course, and then you get the benefit of the breathability of these pads. Now, active noise cancellation still works, even when you have a more breathable pad. It's just less effective. Even with the Stealth pad being as open and breathable as it is, I can still tune out a decent amount of my HVAC system and my PC fans. A little bit better on the FreZe, of course, and then all of the others are a noticeable improvement in isolation. So I actually measured all this. This took a very long period of time, as did measuring the frequency response of all of these for both headsets. It basically took about 150 to 200 measurements just for frequency response. And then the active noise cancellation testing is its whole other beast. Instead of just saying one pad has less isolation than the other, I actually spent a lot of time measuring this. So I took the Brüel & Kjær 5128, I put two speakers on both sides of the rig about 3.5 feet apart, and then I played pink noise and measured the response of that on the head simulator itself. Now, this is the frequency response with no headset on the rig in terms of volume that it was receiving. And just by placing the Maxwell 2 non-ANC headset on the rig, this is how much volume is attenuated at higher frequencies. It's quite noticeable. So just wearing a headset can obviously cut back on noise. Now, when you look at the ANC pad, which is the blue line, you get better attenuation effectively from 200 hertz and up. It's comparable up here. This is within the margin of error. But overall, the Maxwell 2 ANC pad does a better job of reducing outside frequencies further than the stock Maxwell 2 pad. In the interest of time, I'm not going to show all the measurements at the same exact time because it gets very difficult to see, but if I just remove the stock Maxwell 2 non-ANC pad, we'll keep the Maxwell 2 ANC pad as a reference. We look at the sheepskin pad from Dekoni, just again passively placing it on. you can see that there's less isolation here. It's more comparable to the stock Maxwell 2 pad and kind of trades different areas with it. But being a slightly more breathable material, that's to be expected. When we look at the Midnight Pad, in general, they're comparable to each other, but the Midnight Pad does have a little bit better attenuation in the vocal area than the sheepskin pad. Again, the Midnight is that artificial leather. So when we look at the FreZe Pad, and I apologize, this is not the best color, but the FreZe Pad is this line right here. Less attenuation than the sheepskin pad, especially in these frequencies, just because it's a more leaky pad, but not too bad of a performance. I was actually kind of surprised it blocked as much as it did, considering it's a more breathable material. The Stealth Pad passively is going to be the worst one because it's a very open pad. The design of that pad is, again, to feel as open as possible and kind of get rid of the closed back feeling. And as a result, you get almost no attenuation until you get into the like 450 hertz and up range. So that is obviously going to impact ANC performance. So when we look at the difference, I'm going to turn all of these measurements back off. So now we have the passive isolation of the Maxwell 2 pad. If you turn ANC on the Maxwell 2, look at how significant the volume reduction is in these frequencies with the Maxwell 2. That is a significant reduction in volume. And honestly, the performance is quite good in terms of like getting rid of the hum and the background noise of an HVAC system or a computer. Now, when you look at the ANC performance of the Dekoni sheepskin, we're going to get rid of the passive now. This blue line is the ANC performance of the sheepskin versus the Maxwell 2 ANC pad. If we look at the Midnight Edition again is very comparable to the sheepskin in terms of isolation, and we can see clearly that there's an edge going towards the stock Maxwell 2 pad. If we go to the FreZe Pad's ANC performance, the higher frequencies, again, they're somewhat similar, especially to the sheepskin pad, but you lose active noise cancellation performance in the lower frequencies. It's quite noticeable. And the Stealth Pad is obviously going to be the worst, and that is this one here. So if I turn all of these off, just to show you something funny, this is open is the red line, pink is the Stealth Pad without ANC, and blue, this teal color, is the Stealth Pad with ANC enabled. So this is what I was talking about, where it can take the edge off a little bit, but not significantly. And then if you do the same thing with the FreZe Pad is a more noticeable drop with ANC performance, and then the other pads naturally are going to perform better in general. I mean, here's the Midnight Pad with ANC enabled. So if ANC is your top reason for getting the Maxwell 2 ANC, the stock pad's frankly the way to go. It's still a very comfortable pad. I don't want to take away from that. The only thing you lose is the breathability. So one thing I would consider is when ANC is critical, use the stock pad, and when you're open to less ANC needed, or you want something a little bit more breathable and comfortable, that's where the aftermarket pads come in. So now that we've talked about comfort and clamp force and the difference in noise isolation, let's take a look at what happens to your frequency response. So this is what the new website looks like. And because I measured these on the 5128, I'm going to click that filter at the top just to kind of have less options on the left to pick from. I'm going to collapse all brands. We're going to scroll down and click on Audeze. And let's just start with the standard Maxwell 2. This is the Maxwell 2 with the stock pads. This is the Maxwell 2 with the stock pads compared to the FreZe. You can see a difference in bass reduction. Now, if you noticed before, when we look at the passive noise isolation, there was less isolation in the lower frequencies. That's because the pad is more breathable and you're losing bass energy because of that. The pad materials and dimensions is going to affect a lot of the higher frequencies. You could see it's more of a scoop at like 1500 hertz. And then a little bit more of a sharper peak at 8,000 hertz. So when you're doing custom EQ, you probably have to boost 2 kilohertz by a couple dB and maybe reduce 8 kilohertz by 1 or 2 extra compared to what you would have done with the stock pad. When we compare it to the Stealth Pad, remember the Stealth Pad is very leaky by design, and there is a huge reduction in low bass performance. So I do hear more bass than what the rig measures, just because the way the pad fits my head, this leatherette part right here, when it presses just against your ear, you actually get a little bit more of a seal. And as a result, you do get some of that sub bass back. That's part of why the leatherette inner is there, so you don't lose all of this sub bass. But you do have to boost the bass noticeably more than the others. And keep in mind, if you're a bass head and you're already using stock pads or leatherette pads and you cranked the bass, going to the Stealth Pad might disappoint you because you just simply can't make up for that much bass loss to get all of the bass that you're used to with a leatherette pad. Now, when we look at the Dekoni sheepskin pad, you're going to have this orange line. Part of this is a byproduct of being a really, really thick pad. It changes the way the headset interacts with your ear, and you get a noticeable increase in bass performance with that. The one downside I will say, I'm going to turn off the stealth pad here, and let's just compare to stock. There is a noticeable reduction in the the high bass to the low mid range. So like vocals can sound a little bit thinner and anemic because of this trailing right here. So you'll probably have to boost 250 hertz by about 3 decibels. And I would boost 500 hertz by a couple decibels as well. There is also, unfortunately, a noticeable peak here that happens at 3000 hertz, followed by a scoop at 5K. So what happens with the Dekoni pads, and I'm just going to show you the midnight pad because it's almost the same behavior, only the mid-range scoop is even worse on the less expensive midnight pad. When you have this problem where you have a higher peak here and then a scoop and then another peak, with a 10-band EQ built into the Maxwell, you basically have to reduce 4000 hertz to help pull some of this shoutiness down. And if you do that and there's already a dip here, some frequencies might sound less resolving and it might not sound as clear. So you kind of have to pick your battles of where you want the emphasis to be. It doesn't have the same peak that the stock Maxwell 2 pad here has, about 8000 hertz. It's scooped. Instead it shifts it up, but the high treble is basically the same. So that's how the pads impact the frequency response on the standard Maxwell 2. Now the ANC version is going to perform a little bit differently. Before we focus on just the Maxwell 2 ANC version, I just wanted to show you something. This is the Maxwell 2 ANC without ANC enabled on the stock pads using the Audeze preset versus the Maxwell 2 non-ANC with the exact same settings. So if you have both of these set to no ANC, Audeze preset on the stock pads, this is how different the Maxwell 2 ANC sounds. There's noticeably less bass, and there's a little bit of a sharper, more filled in ear gain area. Thankfully, less frequency emphasis at 8000 hertz. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to call out that they're not tuned one for one. So your same EQ settings don't apply from A to B. Now, there's different ways to measure these frequency response using ANC. The most accurate way to measure it on the Maxwell 2 ANC is with a white noise sweep using RTA. It's not a sweep, actually. It's you play pink noise for an extended period of time, let the active noise cancellation system kind of adapt and adjust its frequency response, and then you measure that amplitude and average it. So the purplish line, if you will, if I disable ANC off and show you this, this is the exact same. Let's remove the Maxwell 2 non-ANC. So this is the exact same setting, but the purple line, which has this little hump here, that's using pink noise, whereas the other one is using a sine sweep, which kind of artificially boosts the high frequencies or the mid bass because the chip is actively compensating for noise inside the ear cup volume. So sine sweeps aren't the most accurate way to measure ANC headsets. It is significantly faster though, and I can tell you I already did 150 plus measurements of this. So all of the aftermarket pads are with the standard sine sweep, averaged 8 times per pad. Normally I do 10 for the headset, but I mean, this took literally an entire day. So I just want to show you the next step here, and that's the stock pads sine sweep ANC on versus the stealth pad. So the stealth pad doesn't have as much of a bass reduction because ANC helps compensate for this. So thankfully you can still boost the bass to get it back. And I actually think that getting a lift at 1000 hertz is a welcome change. It also helps, it's slightly less elevated at the ear gain area. However, I still think reducing 4000 hertz and 8000 hertz a bit on the Maxwell 2 ANC is beneficial from a sound tuning perspective. But this is the difference of the stealth pad. Now, when you look at the FreZe Pad is closer to stock on the bass frequency, a little bit more filled in the 500 hertz area, which again is a welcome addition. However, it's followed by a larger scoop at 2000 hertz, so you have to boost 2000 hertz. The big change with the FreZe Pad is it reduces the ear gain region a bit. Like when you get to 3000 hertz, it doesn't have that same peak issue that the stock pads have, but then it's filled in more at 5000 to 8000 hertz. Honestly, the FreZe Pad sounds pretty damn awesome on the ANC edition. It's probably my favorite out of the box when you factor in comfort and minimal EQ changes. However, they still need to be EQ'd. I would just boost 2 kilohertz. You could technically leave 4 kilohertz alone and then reduce 8 kilohertz to compensate, and then you don't have to boost the bass as much. So it's not a bad pad. Now, when we look at the ANC performance of the Dekoni sheepskin pad, let's turn off the stealth pad because it's going to start getting busy. So the Dekoni sheepskin pad is a awesome sounding pad. It's almost the exact same as stock, which honestly isn't saying much because I wasn't a super fan of the stock sound without doing EQ. You still have the 500 hertz recess and a really strong peak frequency lift at 3000 hertz. So my biggest issue though is this right here, the narrow band 6000 hertz on the rig. Mine was slightly higher than this on ear, but it's such a narrow peak that on certain songs you don't hear it, and then other songs the Dekoni pad is just really sparkly, and I didn't get that with any of the other pads. And the Midnight pad with ANC on does the exact same thing. Let's change colors. It's almost the same frequency response as the sheepskin because they have the exact same dimensions. The breathability change affects the low bass performance, where again the synthetic leather has a more stronger seal, so you get a little bit more lift at 50 hertz. So things change a little bit, of course, when we disable ANC. You have, again, a very similar issue with Dekoni pads where you have that big scoop and then more emphasis up here in the higher frequencies. Thankfully, not as much as the stock. Let's go to ANC off on this. When you compare it to the stock pad is more flat. There's no way around it. You can see clearly that the Dekoni pads have more peaks. And if we go to the Wicked Cushion pads without ANC, let's do that. They're not as peaky. They're a little bit more linear, so you get different results. I think the FreZe pads are a little bit easier to deal with from an EQ perspective, but you don't get the same sound isolation or total bass response if that's what you're chasing. So you kind of have to pick what's more important to you and what you're willing to sacrifice. All right, so we made it to the end, and I'm sorry this video was so long. I may not have even made your decision any easier, but hopefully I made your decision more educated. There's pros and cons to all of these pads. Even the stock pads, they're unique to each other, which is just wild. It's not often that you have something so different across the board. I would say that if you have a Maxwell 2 ANC, the Dekoni Midnight pad makes the least sense, only because it produces its own tuning issues and it has similar comfort problems for long-term breathability, being an artificial leatherette. The sheepskin pad is the best balance of both worlds from comfort, stability on your head, breathability for long-term gaming because it's a real leather, and you still get that noise isolation that you want. So if you have an ANC model and you want the best isolation, but maybe a little bit more comfort than the stock pad for long-term gaming, the sheepskin's frankly the only one that's going to give you that, but you do have to pay the premium for it. And then you have the Wicked Cushion pads, which has their own unique properties. The FreZe pad to me is one of the easiest ones to EQ, and frankly with the ANC model, I prefer to EQ the FreZe pad more than the others. It sounds better to me as a whole, provided you're not chasing the maximum amount of bass headroom. And again, there is a trade-off on isolation. This is kind of a middle of the road pad where it's not as leaky as the stealth pad, but it doesn't have the same airtight suction cup feeling that you get with the stock leatherette pads. So I think the FreZe pad is great. Despite the heavier weight and a little bit less stability and slipperiness on your head, I can still wear these for quite a long period of time when I'm gaming or working all day. So that's a welcome change. And then the stealth pad is unique. I designed this pad to be very breathable and open. I did not want a pad that was just like all the other pads out there because there's a lot of other great pads out there. I wasn't trying to compete with that. The stealth is very open. You can see it on the measurements. You lose bass, you lose noise isolation. But if you know that going into it and you like the idea of a very breathable pad, I designed this to feel more open and take away from that like suction cup feel. So it's just a different listening experience, and I still get enough bass with the Maxwell for my games that I play, where I'm more like FPS and openness focused, like Arc Raiders and Battlefield, for example. They still sound great on these, and I can wear them for a long period of time thanks to the breathability. So there's always pros and cons with pads, whether stock or aftermarket, and hopefully after watching this super long-winded video, you learn where those pros and cons are. With that being said, thank you so much for watching and making it to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to see you at the next video. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.